Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Molly Dacey, and for this episode, I'd like to welcome Professor Eugene Sadler-Smith. Eugene is Professor of Organisational Behaviour at Surrey Business School at the University of Surrey. His research interests are hubris and intuition. Amongst his most recent publications are Hubristic Leadership and Intuition in Business. Thank you so much for joining us, Eugene. So to begin, if it's okay with you, I'd like to ask you just some quick fire questions. What was the last book that you read?
The last book that I read? Gosh, Molly, thank you for such a challenging question. What was the last book that I read? I write books, but I don't really read very many books. I don't have the time to read them. What was the last book that I read? It was a Charles Dickens novel called Our Mutual Friend.
Would you recommend it?
It's very dark in parts. It's a balance of light and dark, and it's Dickens's last book. And it's, but it has well, I don't want to say what the ending is because that's a spoiler, but I'll say it is a dark book, but there's light at the end of the tunnel.
I'm very intrigued.
Our Mutual Friend.
What was the last thing that you learned?
The last thing that I learned was how amazing technology can be, because we've just experimented in a live session at Academy Wales 2023 with live polling, with a Slido poll, where we gathered real-time data and created a word cloud that represented the views of the whole group on screen as it emerged, and I was bowled over by it. So that was fantastic.
What do you think your greatest strength is?
My greatest strength is modesty.
That's a brilliant one. What motivates you?
What motivates me? To enjoy what I'm doing. I think once I stop enjoying what I'm doing, then my kind of motivation evaporates. So yeah, motivation and enjoyment kind of go hand in hand for me. And once I stop enjoying something, then I don't be motivated to do it.
And lastly on these, what profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
What a profession other than my own would I like to attempt? Well, I'll take that as what would I have liked to have been.
You take it however you like. Some people like to take it as something ridiculous that they could never do, but would want astronaut, cowboy, you know? Right. Or some people are very, I would have liked to do this if I hadn't landed here. So however you like.
Two things then. What I could have been, because I wake up early, I could have been a milkman. So I wake up at 5 o'clock every day. My dad was a milkman, so I think I would have made a good milkman. So that's what I could have been. What would I have liked to have been, kind of the astronaut cowboy thing, I would have liked to have been a concert pianist.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you for answering those. It's really interesting to know a bit more about you personally. I do have a couple more, but I'll come back to those at the end. So I briefly mentioned in the introduction that you've published many books, including a few specifically about intuition, which is our topic for today's episode. And based on that, I think you're probably one of the most qualified people to tell us, how would you define intuition in the context of leadership, and why do you believe it's important for leaders to develop this skill?
All right, how would I define it? I'll start with an easy definition, then I'll make it more complicated.
Okay,
so
easy saying.
Listeners might want to slow the tape down at certain points. So the easiest way to define it as knowing without knowing how or why you know. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
So you just kind of know something, but you don't know how you know it. So that's my first definition of it. It's knowing without knowing how or why you know. And you know in that situation because you have a gut feeling, or you have a hunch that something isn't quite right. So when I have an intuition, what happens with me often is I get this feeling, this kind of funny feeling that things don't stack up. You know, that someone's story isn't quite right, but I can't put my finger on why. So that would be the simple definition, knowing without knowing how or why you know. Then we can get a bit more scientific if you would like me to. Should I do that?
Yes, please, yeah.
So my second definition, it's not mine, but I'll use it. And if people want to know where it's from, they can contact me and I'll tell them. Another definition of intuition is analysis frozen into habit and the capacity for rapid response through recognition. So does that make any sense to you? Analysis frozen into habit and the capacity for rapid response through recognition. So I hope it makes sense, because what the person who wrote it, who was a Nobel Prize winner actually, Herbert Simon, what he meant by that is when we do things over and over and over again, even when they're complex tasks, so I don't mean a simple thing, like hammering a nail in or whatever. When we do complex things over and over and over again, we do them analytically. We have to think through hard how to do them. Like a chess player. Chess players begin originally by analysing all of the moves, thinking it through analytically. But eventually what happens, chess is an example, but it applies to the workplace and to leadership as well. Eventually, having done those complex tasks many, many, many times, they become frozen into a habit, in the sense that we don't have to think it through how to do them.
Yeah.
So a novice has to think through how to do things in a step-by-step way. And often a novice has to follow a series of steps, A, B, C, D, E. When you become an expert, you don't have to do that, because it's automatic. It's another way to think about intuition in terms of that definition of analysis frozen into habit is as automated expertise. And another word that some people use for intuition is intuitive expertise, which is this idea of things that you've done many, many times becoming habitual. So that would be my second definition. I don't know if you want to follow up on that, or do you want me to go straight through to the third one, which is much longer?
Yeah, I will come in because you've mentioned intuition, and it's obviously something that's important, but it might not come naturally to people to trust their own intuition. And especially in some organisations, leaders might be basing their decisions on facts and data and don't trust their own intuition. So how can leaders strike a balance between trusting data versus trusting their gut instinct? Like you said, that's the feeling that you get.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, Molly, because you said strike a balance. So when I talk about intuition to groups of executives or whoever, students, it can come across that I'm kind of advocating that they should follow their intuition. I'm not that's not the case at all. My work isn't advocacy for intuition. What I'm trying to do is to enable people to understand intuition better in order to be able to use it more effectively. So coming back to your point about balance, and then you talked about analysis and so on, and then if we put analysis and intuition kind of into the same picture, into the same frame, it's not a question of, for a leader or a manager or anybody in life in general, it's not a question of either intuition or analysis. So let's forget either or. Let's go for this idea of the balance. And it's a case of both intuition and analysis. So as a leader, you don't have the luxury of being able to choose between intuition and analysis. What you have to do as an effective leader is to strike that balance between using intuition for what it's good at and using analysis for what it's good at. So that then begs another question. What are they each good at? They're good at different things. So analysis, I boil it down simply to two words, both beginning with S. Analysis is good at solving. We use analysis to solve problems. And analytical thinking is step by step, it's logical, it's systematic, and it helps us to solve. And computers can do that, machines can do that, which brings up the question of artificial intelligence. So analysis is good at solving, and managers need to be able to solve problems. But on the other hand, so this idea of both intuition and analysis, so if analysis is good at solving, what is intuition good at? Intuition is good at the other S in this equation, which is sensing. So intuition is good at sensing things, and it can sense things that analysis can't solve, if we could think of it like that. So, and then if you put together, for a leader or a manager, this dual ability to solve on the one hand and sense on the other, by bringing those two together, the ability to solve and sense, there's kind of a synergy at work that makes your decision making not only more efficient, but more effective as well, because you've got the best of both worlds. The kind of the psychology of it we could go into, but we don't need to go into it in that much depth. But, we've got one brain, but we've got two minds. And we've got an analytical mind that's good at solving, and we've got an intuitive mind that's good at sensing. And to be an effective leader, you don't choose between them. You use them both to the best for the things that they are good at.
Yeah. It's just really interesting. Because we've spoken how leaders personally can kind of learn to trust their intuition and use both. But how do you think leaders can create a culture in their own organisation that encourages using both sides of the brain rather than if, say, you work for an organisation that's massively target heavy, data analysis, how can you create a culture that makes people consider using the two sides of their brain?
Irrespective of the kind of organisation that we're talking about, the people inside organisations will have intuitions whether we like it or not. So whether an analytical organisation or an analytical data-driven manager likes it or not, they themselves will have intuitions, and the people that they work with will have intuitions. So intuitions will happen whether we don't. The funny thing about intuitions is that we don't ask them to arise. They gate crash our conscious awareness.
Yeah.
It's not like analysing a problem where you have to do it effortfully, and make a choice and make a decision. I'm going to solve this problem analytically. Intuition's different. It just comes out of the blue. It gate crashes, but it's there. And once you've had an intuition, you can't unhave it.
Yeah.
It's like once you've seen something, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
So once you've had an intuition, you've had it. You can't unhave it. And you have to deal with it. Because I think the worst way, or let me put it another way, the best way to develop bad intuitions is to have them and lock them away in a closet. A good way to develop good intuitions is to admit that you're having them, recognise that they can be right and they can be wrong. We can come onto that balance a little bit if we get round to it. But recognise that you have them, recognise that they can be right, but they can also be wrong. But then actually opening up the closet, I call it, where you share the fact that you've had an intuition with a colleague. In other words, what you're doing is you're subjecting your intuition about a situation. It might be about an appointment, that the recruitment situation. It might be about a project. It might be about a budget. It might be about a strategy. It could be about anything. But actually sharing your intuition, your gut feeling, your intuition that you have about it, opens it up to interpretation. And then in talking your intuition through with colleagues, you're making sense of it. And in making sense of your intuition, it can actually improve it, because it can do two things. You can either say, okay, well, yeah, my intuition really doesn't stack up in these situations. I need to just dismiss it. It wasn't a valid intuition. But only by actually opening up the closet, talking about them, in dialogue with other people, interpreting them and making sense of them, that's a good way to develop good intuitions and to find out whether they were accurate or not in the long run, find out what the results are.
Yeah. Are there any specific techniques or exercises that leaders can employ to strengthen their own intuition or their colleagues' intuition?
Well, for a leader or a manager, the first way to strengthen your intuition, it's not an easy way, it's a hard way, and it's called practice, because intuitive expertise that we spoke about early on in this discussion, intuitive expertise takes a long time to build. So there's this thing in psychology called the 10,000 hour rule. So it takes 10,000 hours, which can roughly equate to like 8 to 10 years. So it can take between 8 to 10 years, i.e. 10,000 hours to become an expert. So, if you're straight out of university and into your first managerial leadership role, well, you have to accept that it will take time to develop the expertise that will enable you to be intuitive in that role. And there's no kind of shortcut in that sense. So there's practice is important. But then the other thing about practice is it's not just, the problem with saying practice, it implies it's just quantity of practice.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's the quality of the practice that you have. So quality practice, high quality practice, yeah, it involves doing the things that you do, but it also involves going outside of your comfort zone and actually stretching yourself a bit to kind of build your expertise. So you don't kind of just keep digging in the same hole. So that's practice. But the other thing that's related to practice and high quality practice is feedback.
Yeah.
Because the best way to develop bad intuitions is to not get feedback on whether they were right or wrong. So you need high quality practice and you need high quality feedback on your performance. And what does high quality feedback look like? Well, it's accurate feedback in the first place from whoever's giving you the feedback. That can be a colleague, it can be a boss, it can be someone who reports to you, it can be a mentor, it can be a coach. It's got to be accurate feedback. It's got to be timely. It has to be there in the moment when it's actually going to be useful, not 6 months down the line or a year down the line. And it also has to be constructive. And that for me would be high quality feedback. That's a good way to develop your intuition. The other thing that I use it myself, and it's a little bit of it's kind of a little shortcut or a heuristic, and I call it the traffic light diagram or the traffic light model. And it comes back to the point you made a little while ago about this idea about balance, which I really like. So if you think of a traffic light system and you've got two minds at work, you've got an analytical mind and you've got an intuitive mind. So what do you do if your analytical mind says no and your intuitive mind says no? Well, that's a no-brainer, isn't it? That's a big red light. That's what we can all do. That's a big red light. That's still ask them both. So what does the analysis say? What does my intuition say? They both say no. Red light, just don't do it. Just don't go there. Of course, flip that on its head. So if your intuition says yes, and your analysis says yes, so your gut feeling says yes, the data says yes, that's a green light. That's another no-brainer. The interesting place, of course, is where you get yes, no, and no, yes. So if your intuition says no and your analysis says yes, well, you need to kind of dig and delve a little bit into, maybe there's something wrong with the analysis that the intuition has spotted. So you might want to look at your figures again, because your intuition is saying, hang on, the figures stack up, but it doesn't feel right. So that's an amber light. And what you want to do is to turn the amber light into red or green.
Yeah.
And then you flip it on your head that, your intuition says yes, but the analysis says no. So you've got a strong gut feeling about something, but the facts and figures say, actually, no, this isn't right. So then, in that case, you kind of would be well advised to kind of explore your intuition a little bit more and say, well, the analysis is saying my intuition isn't right here. Let's just double check and run the ruler over it and see if it does stack up. I mean, a good way to do that as well, another kind of trick, I suppose, is devil's advocacy.
Yeah.
So play devil's advocate with your own intuition, stress test it.
Yeah.
If I did this, what would happen? Or get other people to be devil's advocate with it and really probe it and put it, stress test it to breaking point. And if it survives that devil's advocacy stress test, then that's kind of a strong indication that you might want to go with it. But having said that, it's intuition, it's a judgment, and there's no guarantee.
Yeah.
But I think as we gain in experience and become more intuitive, I think what happens is our intuition gets it right more than it gets it wrong. It's almost like a batting average thing.
Yeah.
You have to accept that it will get it wrong sometimes. But my counter to that is, well, analysis doesn't get it right 100% of the time. If it did, well, we wouldn't need anything else, would we? We could just use data for everything.
Yeah.
So data and analytics get it wrong. Of course, intuition gets it wrong as well. And that's why it's a complicated matter. It's a complicated matter of judgment, really.
Yeah. Thank you so much for all the stories and ideas and advice. But before we end, I'd like to ask you a few more quick fire questions, if that's okay. Do you or have you ever played a musical instrument?
Going back to wanting to become a concert pianist, when I was a teenager, I tried to teach myself to play the piano. So we did have a piano in the house, which I kind of self-taught myself to play a little bit.
Oh, really?
And when I get some spare time, which isn't likely to be soon, then I might retake up that little hobby. I'll never become a concert pianist, but I might.
Well, you never know. You never know.
You never know, do you?
What is your favourite type of food?
My favourite type of food is Italiano.
Popular choice.
Popular choice, and I'm
Yeah.
I'm an excellent pizza chef.
Are you?
From scratch, yes.
Oh, amazing. What a
Yeah,
skill
I
to
would,
have.
I would pay good money to eat my pizzas.
Oh, well, there we are. Maybe your other profession should be pizzeria. What is your favourite noise?
Great question. My favourite noise is silence.
Is it? Oh, we haven't had that one
I
before.
love the sound of silence. In this crazy world that we live in,
Yeah.
there's no better sound than the sound of silence.
We kind of covered this earlier, and it was going to be, are you a morning person or a night owl? But we did figure out you're a morning person. Have you always been a morning
I've
person?
always been a frustrated milkman. Ever since I was a kid, I've woken up at 5 o'clock and don't have an alarm clock. I never need to use one, unless I've got a 2 o'clock flight or 2
Oh
o'clock
my
taxi
gosh.
to the airport. But on the other hand, so that's the upside. The downside is, of course, by 9, 10 o'clock at night in the evening, I'm rubbish. Just don't talk to me because I'm about to, enter the land of Nod.
Last question is, if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
If I could have one superpower, what would it be? To read people's minds.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. I love this question because I feel like it tells a lot about a person. So again, thank you so much for joining us, Eugene. I hope you enjoyed the experience.
Thank you, Molly. I really enjoyed it, actually, so thank you very much.
Mae ein podlediad sgyrsiau ar arweinyddiaeth ar gael trwy ein gwefan. Mae'r hawlfraint y podlediad yma yn cael ei gadw gan Llywodraeth Cymru. Our Conversations on Leadership podcast is available through our website. Copyright of this podcast is held by the Welsh Government.